We were basically one Soviet colonel away from a full-scale nuclear disaster. Colonel Stanislav Petrov was working at a Soviet military installation 16 miles south of Moscow when the Soviet satellite and computer system set off an alarm indicating the United States had launched a nuclear missile against Moscow, which would strike in less than half an hour. Here's part of that story reported by Dateline correspondent Dennis Murphy back in 2000.
Colonel Petrov was a cog in the chain of command, but his read of the situation was still critical. He had all the incoming data. With the alarm blaring, his men saying it's real, his computer saying it's real, the colonel made a decision way beyond his pay grade, beyond even his authority. He decided it had to be a false alarm because it simply didn't smell right to him.
This is not the way to start a war. Our idea was that a war starts with a massive launch. So I made a decision that it was a false alarm. I picked up the phone and reported that to my commander.
And the more Petrov thought about it, the more he convinced himself that he was right. After all, he thought, why would the United States fire just one missile? The colonel was still confident as he advised the Supreme Command to stand down. But at the very moment he was on the phone, the flashing start screen went off again. The satellite was seeing more missiles, a U.S. salvo, one then another.
In a matter of 2 minutes, a third, fourth, and a fifth missile were reported launched.
Could this be it? The big one, the nightmare come true. What would he advise his commanders now? Colonel Petrov knew very well that the Soviet response might not be tit for tat, a city for a city. The Russians could launch everything. The targets, the American cities that his satellites passed over. New York, Washington, Chicago, Los Angeles.
Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, Charleston.
All of them were targets of what would have been the Soviet response, huh?
There is no question about it. The aftermath in the United States would have been horrible.
Even after the Soviet computer system indicated those additional U.S. missile launches, Colonel Petrov stood his ground, insisting to his superiors that the Soviet system had generated false information. His argument prevailed. And this one Soviet-Russian disfigure is one of the great heroes, literally, of mankind. President-elect Donald Trump, by contrast, argued in a tweet last week that, quote, the United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capabilities such that until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes. Trump later telling MSNBC, quote, let it be an arms race. We will outmatch them at every pass and outlast them all. We don't know who them is. Trump's comments about nuclear weapons have experts worried he could literally inadvertently trigger a catastrophe. Imagine we're in a crisis. If he recklessly tweets, people could read these things in the worst possible light, nuclear non-proliferation expert Jeffrey Lewis told the Washington Post, adding the North Koreans have a plan to use nuclear weapons very early in a conflict. They're not going to wait around. Joining me now, Charlie Pierce, writer-at-large for Esquire. And Charlie, and it made me think of how important just a general assumption of predictability and rationality is in the kind of game theoretical decisions made around nuclear weapons.
Yeah, and I think if you go back and listen to the tapes are available now. If you go back and listen to the tapes of the deliberations within the Kennedy administration during the Cuban Missile Crisis, you can hear President John Kennedy making that same calculation in his head. Why would he do this? Let's figure out why he did this so we can figure a way to let him get out of what he's done. Of course, Colonel Petrov had to do this with an alarm blaring in his ear and most of his superiors breathing down his neck and with about 15 seconds to make the call.